Hello, this is Andrew Blumhart in Bloomington, Illinois with Laser Wars, and I have Generation 2 LaserTag Pro laser tag guns, and I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of the teardown and normal repair procedures that I run through for my equipment. This is Generation 2. I know there's Generation 3 and 4 and soon 5 equipment out there, but in many regards, the steps are going to remain the same for the equipment for at least for the time being. So I thought I'd share some tips because I think I've done just about every mistake you can possibly make with this equipment. And I'm kind of going to do this one-handed, so you know, it might be a little shaky at times, but I've done a couple of steps in advance to kind of speed this up. So you're going to remove your scope initially. You're going to remove your cover on your barrel if you have a barrel cover, which is not as easy to do one-handed as I anticipated. So then you're back to the gun. Now, obviously, I have put some reflective tape on mine that isn't normally on the equipment. For those who aren't familiar, just so you know. And you're going to want to flip it over so the screen is on the bottom side. A quick maintenance tip that I use, if I'm having I actually have pre-cut strips of orange duct tape in my kit that I use to mark the equipment when I find a repair issue or a maintenance issue, either reported by a customer or something that I see when I'm operating, so that when I get home and when I'm reconfiguring the equipment, I can identify those issues and address them quickly. A lot of times the issues aren't critical, people can play through, so sometimes it's very difficult to identify those once you get home. So I'll have like a strip like this of orange tape. If it's just a general maintenance issue, I put it underneath the grip. If it is something more specific, I might actually put a piece of tape in a place like this if the light's burned out or something like that. And to my surprise, I thought customers would pick these stickers off. To my surprise, that has never been an issue. But having a little piece of tape, to mark a piece somewhere close to where the issue is, or just a general mark at the bottom letting you know this marker needs tagger needs maintenance, will help you identify those quickly. So anyway, you want to have a properly sized screwdriver with a magnetic tip, and I highly recommend never using an electrical screwdriver. I think people might be tempted to do that to save time, but you're going to strip screws or over torque screws. So you're going to remove the screws, and when you're using the magnetic tip, the screws, a majority of the screws will just come right out into your hand once they're removed. And since this has been disassembled here recently, these might not come out, but usually they'll come right out into your hand, and you can pull your screws right out. The ones in the barrel tend to stay in through the repair process, but most of the screws just pop right out. So you got about 15 screws on the gun. You don't have to remove the full pistol grip. You can just remove one side. That'll get you in. There's no reason to remove the battery compartment screw. So once those are out, you can start to pry the halves apart. You're going to notice a lot more tension up here. This is where things are, most of the meat and potatoes are up here. As you pull it out, you're going to open the shell this way, and you'll see inside, early on, you're going to look for two things. The first thing is our trigger cord, and I know this is a little dark, but right here is our trigger cord. You're going to pop that, and that goes to the trigger, and then you should be able to just lay the halves back, and you have two halves. You may also need to disconnect the charging cord, which is this red one here, if this gets too tight. But for the most part, you should be able to lay the halves one on top of the other. And I know this isn't the highest quality video here, but that's not the point. So then you're going to replace the parts that you normally replace inside. That might be the speaker, that might be the trigger spring. And then when you go to reassemble the equipment, you want to take a few minutes to do an inspection. You want to make sure that your light emitter is properly seated, that your sensors up here, and actually pulled over to this side on this one, are still seated. You want to inspect your cables for any pinches or cuts. You want to make sure that your your motor is well seated for your rumble, and just a general inspection. Also, you want to make sure that your Wi-Fi antenna is well seated. These can come loose over time and cause the equipment to rattle, and it's probably not good on the antenna for it to rattle around inside the equipment. And I really highly recommend inspecting where your charging ports connect here, because this cable can get a lot of tension when you're repairing. Sometimes you don't realize it, and you can pull those out. And the more those electrical leads get messed with, especially on here and on the trigger switch itself, those leads can break off. If you have a hot glue gun handy, it just takes a second to drop a drop of hot glue on those leads, giving those wires a lot more life to them. The other thing I want to mention real quick is the trigger spring has a tendency to break. What I use are these little I guess silly bands or bracelet bands. Fold them in half, pop them on here, and they will hold you together for quite a long time. They do lose tension over time and get a little bit looser. Anytime I disassemble one of my guns, I put a fresh band in place, and only once or twice have I actually had those bands break, though they would obviously break over time. So then that's pretty much it. I mean, most of the parts are pretty self-explanatory to replace. Just take your time. Be careful not to break anything. If you need to, you could take a picture with your phone to validate once you put it back together, but it's all very simple. So then you go to reassemble the gun, you want to fold your half back. You want to plug in any leads that you disconnected. The one in particular here is your trigger spring, or your trigger cord. Pop that in, and then close up the halves. So you want to make sure that the halves, take your time, be very gentle, kind of do a wiggle to get them back in place. You'll also, if you find any tension or problems, you might want to open it back up, make sure something didn't come out of place. Before you really pinch this down, you want to work your way around and look for cords that have been pinched by the camshells, like you see here. You want to look around the sides, make sure there are no problems. If you need to, you can push those cords back in with a screwdriver, or you can open the halves again and reposition those cords to avoid pinching. So now these cords are down out of the way. We'll jiggle this back into place. So, yeah, and that came back into there. 1 second here. That cord just wants to get pinched. Which is obviously part of the problem is I'm doing it one-handed. So once it's assembled, you want to do, maybe even before you screw it back together, a quick inspection. You want to make sure that your trigger springs pulls. You want to click your reload button on the other side and make sure that feels good. Again, inspect for those wires. And then when you go to put your screws back in, you want to use a proper screwdriver once again, rather than something electrical, and tighten those screws just to the point that they get some nice tension to them. You don't want to over tighten them. You don't want to strip the heads on those screws. A real challenge with something like this could be stripping the screw heads. It would make it very difficult to repair these over time. And over the course of a couple of years, you're probably going to pop open each one of these maybe once or twice a year. And over time, those type of repetitive little injuries to the equipment, to the screw heads and to the leads of those wires can lead to some bigger issues later on. So then once you have the screws back in and the equipment's back on, you want to power it on. If you're using Edge, you want to make sure it still connects to a wireless access point to make sure that you didn't cause any damage there. You want to inspect your lights. You want to be able to and get some sound from the equipment to make sure your speaker's still working. And then I highly recommend looking into the lens or shining a flashlight into the lens, making sure that your IR emitter and muzzle flash lights are properly aligned. I have found after the fact guns that were reassembled and the IR emitter in the barrel was off, in there incorrectly, making it impossible for the player to ever make an elimination. So what a disappointment experience for a player if you mess that up. So really, that's about it. Again, I know this ran 10 minutes, but hopefully that will help people avoid a lot of the technical issues. Also, and as you screw the screws in, especially in some of the grip areas, you want to probably be a little cautious and slow. You'll get a feel for what it feels like if you were to start crushing or cutting a cable underneath the screw. If it kind of pulled into place right underneath the screw, you'll feel that tension. If you're feeling for it, you can avoid damaging cables that might be in the way. So really, that's about it. Just take your time. Be careful not to damage those screw heads, and make sure to test your work once it's assembled. Worst thing to do is to completely disassemble it, put it back together, and then find that you've overlooked something or caused additional damage to that which you opened it to repair. So again, this is Andrew from Laser Wars in Bloomington, Illinois, and thank you once again. Have a good day.